Welcome back to another Training Babble podcast. We are back with Dr. Phil for another fast physiology. How are you doing?
Good, man. Thanks for having me back.
So if you're not up to speed yet, Phil and I go back and forth on our respective podcasts. Phil has the Critical Oxygen podcast. I have Training Babble. And each week we alternate focusing on one aspect of physiology or training and try to keep it fairly short. Mm-hmm. And so this week we are talking about the top training mistakes. And I want to put a number on it, but I think that we're just going to end up going down a rabbit hole here.
It's just going to be 20 minutes of us rattling off training mistakes that people make, right?
Exactly. And I like not to put too much of a negative spin on this, but I do think there are things that as a coach, I see come up over and over and over again. And I'm sure you see them too. You do a lot of ask me anythings on Instagram and get questions from people. And so, yeah, I think we can provide a pretty good perspective on this, on maybe what people are focusing on that they shouldn't be focusing on.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll be able to provide some alternatives to the mistakes that you're making, because it's one thing to point out all the issues with what you're doing.
Exactly.
It's another thing, and this is what good coaches are for, to point out, this is what you may be doing wrong. Here's how you can fix it instead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point there. So I guess just to kick this off, why don't you start? When you're answering your Ask Me Anythings, is there one thing that you see come up over and over again that makes you crazy?
It's not something that makes me crazy, but it's just the lack of focus on the big things that are going to do the most for your training. And what I mean by that is, instead of focusing on the Norwegian method, for example, I get questions about that all the time. How about you focus on staying consistent, developing specificity, and developing progression? It's a lot more boring than chasing that kind of new fancy thing that's out there. But
yeah, I call that the flavor of the moment.
Yeah, exactly. Stop chasing the flavor of the month and just do the thing that's going to allow you to be consistent, specific, and progressive. And I think, people look around and they see other people having success in whatever they're doing, right? And they say, oh, well, what is that individual doing? Because obviously what they're doing is garnering that level of success. And then something crazy comes out, like double lactate threshold days with, X, Y, and Z. And that's just the very small amount of context you get. Oh, these guys are doing 2 times a week, double lactate threshold days, and this is the reason why they are good now. It's like, I started looking into the Norwegian method because I was asked to do a podcast about it. And there's a ton of different tenets and other things like that actually go into this quote unquote Norwegian method. And it's like, okay, well, we can't just cherry pick one thing out of that and be like, this is going to be the golden bullet that's going to, help us.
Yeah.
Because what it comes down to for the Norwegian method is they are staying consistent. Like, they're doing a shitload of mileage and volume. They are being very specific to the races that they're doing. So the runners, right, the Ingebrigtsen brothers are doing, they're doing those double threshold days to accumulate volume at the race intensity that they're actually going to be racing, like the 1500 to the 5K. And they're progressing it over time. So ideally, they're expanding the amount of volume that they can accumulate at that specific race pace. So within the context of their training, they're following those things. But when you take this out of context and you say, oh, I need to be doing double lactate threshold days because that's going to make me better. It's like, no, if you're only training 5 days a week with 20 miles per week, it doesn't make sense for you to go and do double threshold days. We need to build that volume up. We need to build it up slowly enough that you can still stay consistent. And then we need to be doing practice that is specific to your race. So if you're not racing a 1500 to a 5K or maybe a 10K, it doesn't make sense for us to do those double lactate threshold days, at least depending on the part of the season. And it might make more sense for us to do longer tempo and threshold workouts. If you're doing, like a half marathon, a marathon, a half Ironman, an Ironman, right? So that's the number one biggest mistake. And I think, like the takeaways here are that you need to train to the context of who you are, not to who somebody else is that is having success. It's great to get motivation and energy from them. Be like, oh, they're crushing it, I want to crush it too. But then be realistic with yourself and say, what is actually realistic for me to build my volume, to build my intensity up, and what things do I need to specifically focus on?
Yeah, and I'll just add to that I think a lot of times what people miss, I was talking to somebody about this yesterday actually, is I think about that motivational poster with the iceberg, and it shows like the tip of the iceberg, and it's like what everybody sees, and then what's below it is like what brings that peak above the surface, right? And so it's like people see this success and they're like, oh, these guys are having success. What are they doing right now? Okay, that must be, they don't see the years of work that went into that. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, elite athletes are trying to eke out every bit of improvement they can. And so they've already maxed out volume, consistency, progression, and everything else. So they're looking for the ways. And like the research shows us that once you get to a certain point, more experienced athletes need more intensity, need more like bigger stimuli to get adaptation. But again, they've already like taken care of all the low-hanging fruit, and like they're out of other options versus most athletes.
Yep. Yeah. And if you aren't, if you're not optimizing your nutrition, your recovery, your consistency first and foremost, then you're not going to set yourself up to be able to adapt, to these, flavor of the month, style workouts and stuff like that. If anything, it's going to result in you getting sick or tired or burnt out. And then, there goes your consistency, and consistency is the absolute key, to maintaining success and getting better within any endurance training plan.
Yeah, and I'll just finish up on this one by mentioning, like, a lot of times with athletes, I take them on, and usually I go and review their training, and they're usually deficient, or the low-hanging fruit is in one area. It's like frequency, consistency, or intensity. Like, and typically it's too much intensity.
Yep.
And so it's usually adjusting those things, right? And I think for most people, just like taking a look at those things is going to have the bigger impact on their things. And so this leads into one of my big mistakes is not taking enough recovery or rest to actually allow that adaptation to occur. And this is something, I don't know if you use Training Peaks, but in Training Peaks, there's a performance management chart, and they have a blue line that they call fitness, which used to be chronic training load. And really what it's looking at is how much have you been training over the last 6 weeks? Mm-hmm. And so once you call it fitness, everybody wants that line to keep going up and keep going up and keep going up. But it's like the fitness doesn't happen in those bouts of stress. It happens in between the stress.
Right.
And so I just see that, especially if people have jobs, have families, have all these other things, that they're burning the candle at both ends. And so it's just like, we did another podcast on stress, and it's like, it's just stress on stress on stress. And so there's never this like down period that allows their body to kind of like recover and adapt to that stress and become more resilient. And so then your training just becomes kind of unproductive and like banging your head into the wall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just, you're just spinning your wheels and you're not really going anywhere. And I've run into this issue with myself personally, and it's really easy to kind of want to fall into this trap of like, alternating hard, easy, hard, easy, hard, easy. Just because it's nice, right? So from a just a plan perspective, you're like, okay, I got a hard day, then an easy day, then a hard day, then an easy day. But it really comes down to, I think probably for the most part, most people need at least 2 days between a hard bout, because the goal for your hard workout should be able to come back and like crush it the next time. Like that's
Right.
like, you need to make your hard workouts hard. And I think too, you know, like we also then need to emphasize the recovery aspect of things. The days that you're not doing your hard workouts are going to be the days where you need to listen to your body. Yeah, go easier.
No,
Did
go
you
to
say
CrossFit.
Yeah.
Yeah, just pile more stuff on, you know.
Yeah, or just do CrossFit every single day and then wind up like me with a messed up shoulder, a messed up back, you know, like chronic fatigue, all this other stuff. It's like
I say that because I see that a lot of times where people on their recovery days end up going and doing like hot yoga and like all this stuff that just ends up being more stress. Like it just never truly a recovery day. And it's like I think very motivated athletes have a hard time just like relaxing.
I think type A individuals have a tough time because, you know, a lot of the times it's like, it's kind of this no pain, no gain mentality, or if I don't feel like it's hard, then it's not rewarding in a sense. And it's really tough to break that sort of mindset. Like I've been trying to do it and I keep falling back into these patterns of like, yeah, you know, like I want to go hard, easy just because it looks nice. And I'm like, well, I probably could go, you know, something like hard, easy, hard, easy. And then, you know, that would be pretty adequate. But for some reason, you know, I just don't. And I think the solution to that again is to remind yourself on a day-to-day basis what it is you are trying to accomplish during a workout. And this is something that I think it's a little where like this idea of like, oh, zone 2 always has to be at that like cusp of zone 2 in order to get the most benefit out of it and other things like that. I think that in and of itself almost is an inappropriate mindset because it's kind of like, oh, well, if like I have to be on that, you know, like razor's edge of riding like the very, very high end of it. Because if I'm not, then I'm not getting any benefits. Like, no, no matter what you do today, you're going to get more benefits than if you just didn't do anything. And what you need to do is you need to find a balance between facilitating recovery, accumulating volume, and being able to come back and do your hard workouts hard. This is the way I think of it, is like if you're trying to sculpt like a sculpture, right? Statue of David or something like that. You have a block of marble. Your high intensity days are where you're just taking out huge chunks of that marble. But the problem is that too much high intensity or just too much intensity in general, like, because this could come from, you know, too much zone 3 as well. If you're a runner, if you're a cyclist, it's called sweet spot training, which I don't know if I necessarily agree with either. But if you take too big of chunks too often, then you run the risk of cracking that marble and cracking that statue and having to start over.
Yeah.
Where the zone 2 comes in is allowing for structural changes that are, you know, more minute, right? You know, you're chiseling in, you know, kind of the details of like the nose or the eye or like whatever it is. And, you know, obviously statues don't recover from things, but if they could, then, you know, after 2 days of, you know, like making those like more minute details, you can go back to taking off big chunks, you know, so maybe you work on the torso now. So that's the way that I think of zone 2. And I think a lot of people would benefit from that because we do have a tendency to be like, oh, well, higher intensity must be better, you know, up to the cap of zone 2, as opposed to being like, well, as long as I'm within that range, I'm getting 80 to 90 to 95% of whatever benefit I would be getting if I was at the top of that range.
Right. Without the risk of overdoing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess it's your turn to talk about another mistake, but I'll just mention real quick. Maybe we can tag this on to what we were just discussing. I think another common mistake is thinking that intensity is a substitute for volume. Yes. So if I don't have much time to train, then anytime I train, it should be really hard or should be hard, you know? And this is what I would say with that. And I've like said this to athletes before. Like, I think that's the difference between training and exercising. if all you want to do is get your sweat on and release endorphins and trying to be healthy and stuff like that, then yeah, go for it. Like go do your spin class and go to your body pump and all that other stuff. Like whatever makes you feel good and keeps you active, have at it. But if you're trying to enhance your performance at a specific event, then you should be training with a purpose.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think, and again, this comes back to just knowing what the purpose of a workout is. So because I think if you can put into perspective the purpose of a workout, then you can change your mindset to be like, okay, well, this isn't supposed to feel hard. This is supposed to feel like it's like recovery and stuff like that. And I crush the shit out of that, workout, right?
Yeah,
you can bring that mentality to an easy workout. It's just, you don't want to be rolling on the floor when you're done with it.
Yeah, exactly. So what's your next big mistake?
Yeah. So I think you mentioned something about nutrition, but I think to pair with that, I think what I see people making mistakes in is changing their nutritional strategies on race day. That I think is a huge mistake. When I have had the worst racing days, I have made nutritional changes like, I'm just going to try to eat whatever I can. I'm going to just like eat this different gel. I'm going to, set up my morning differently, like all of these other things. And ultimately, like I've been lucky enough because it hasn't resulted in like DNF because of, stomach issues or anything like that. But a lot of people change things up on race day and then they wonder why, they get to, if they're in a triathlon or something like that, or the latter portion of the race, their stomach starts to hurt so bad, or they cramp up really crazily, or, other things like that. And then they have to drop out. So that I think is a huge mistake, is like only take in the nutrition and hydration that you have practiced. And if for some reason it is suboptimal, then yes, maybe your finish time is going to be slightly suboptimal, but at least you are going to get across that finish line and hopefully mitigate any issues that you could have taken on if you decided, I'm just going to go from 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour to 120 because that's what everybody else is doing, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's the nutritional side of things.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of tack onto that. I think not only nutrition, but like one of the old adages is just like nothing new on race day.
Yeah.
And so don't try a new chamois, don't try a new saddle, don't try new shoes, don't
mess with your bike fit. Yeah, exactly. Like don't go from wearing socks to not wearing socks. Like you're just setting yourself up for failure here. And from a psychological perspective, it's interesting to think about, right? Because it's like, okay, well, you've done all this practice and all this training, and now you're going to be, because you read something on a blog. This is kind of chasing the flavor of the month, right? You see somebody else doing something and you're like, oh, that's a good idea. I need to change it. It's like, no. That can wait till the next training block once we get out of this race, because I can guarantee you the potential for negatives is way higher than any potential for, positives.
Yeah. I think the next mistake that I'll add on here is also on the nutrition front, but on the other side of it is not eating enough. I think there's such an emphasis, especially in cycling, to be light.
Yes.
And so, like, I think there can be a time to, if you can visibly see that you have weight to lose, or, you have some extra pounds or whatever, like there is a time to focus on that. And it's like, you can like do it through diet and stuff like that. But I think there's such an emphasis, and as people are starting to increase their volume, increase their intensity, they're also reducing their calories, trying to get light.
Mm-hmm.
And it just like, you need to fuel the work you do. And it's like, it's so important. I think people like, and this will feed into the next one that we'll talk about, is hyper optimization. But it's like we get to this thing with nutrition where we stop seeing food as food and we only see it as like macronutrients. Mm-hmm. And like I've run into this myself where it's like I open the fridge and it's like, oh, I can't eat that because it's this, and I can't eat that because it's this, and it's like, so pretty soon you're like, well, what can I eat? Because nothing is the nutrients that I need, the macronutrients. Right. And so I just think like food is fuel the work you do. Like if you're doing lots of work, you need to eat lots.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just listening to talking about the Norwegian Method podcast with Olav Alexander Boo. And I really like his approach to nutrition because the way that he talks about it, he says, first and foremost, if you're not if you don't have energy on board, you can't grow. That's like, first and foremost. And so you need to have enough energy available to your body in order to be able to grow and recover, in order to be able to fuel those workouts that you're actually doing. And I think because people have made the connection that, oh, these professionals are skinny and I can see all their muscles and all that sort of stuff. Therefore, if I lose weight, I will be better. There was a beautiful study, and it wasn't a great study, but it was like a beautiful study to demonstrate this point, where they took a bunch of CrossFit athletes and they looked for correlates of CrossFit performance. And you know what they found? The people who had the lowest body fat percentage did the best in CrossFit competitions. And their conclusions, and I wanted to put them on blast so bad, but their conclusions, and I am, I guess now, their conclusions were the less body fat percent you have, the better off at CrossFit you're going to be. And I'm like, no, chances are the individuals who had the lowest body fat percentages, that was just a product of the fact that they could train so much and they were fueling enough that their body didn't carry excess body fat on it. Like, so because if I was reading that and I was reading it and I thought to myself, well, all I got to do is get super skinny.
Yeah.
And then I'll be an amazing CrossFitter. So like from that logic, it's so ass backwards that like we would then conclude that, oh, the bodybuilders who are on stage for the Arnold, for the Arnold Classic should be the best CrossFitters in the world, right? Because they have the lowest body fat percentage. It's like, and you're laughing because that's completely asinine, right? Like that conclusion is so dumb. But it's like, I think people have made that conclusion as well. They see these elite level athletes, they see how thin they are, and they're like, oh, I just need to look like them, and then the performance will come. As opposed to, let's fuel the body and chase performance rather than the looks, and your performance will be better. So therefore you will perform, like, therefore your race times will be better. And, ultimately, yes, it does matter. Like, like body composition does matter, but only to a certain extent. And if you're not fueling the body, then you're not providing the nutrients that, you're going to need to repair the body, stay consistent, and race the best that you possibly can.
Right. Yeah. And I just want to add on to that. I think like one of the biggest mistakes in science is assuming causation from correlation.
Yeah.
And so that kind of goes back to, we can say that with the Norwegian method too, right? Like we just talked about that. It's like assuming that these guys are fast, these are the workouts they're doing, therefore these are the workouts I need to do, without the regard for the things that came before it and everything. And so very similar. So my last takeaway, or my last mistake here, and we've done a podcast on this too, is hyper optimization. And we already spoke to it a little bit. It's looking for those marginal gains, chasing marginal gains before you've taken care of the fundamentals. And so, like you said, it's like, it's not sexy. Like one of the things I tell people all the time, like when all of a sudden they have success and it's like, just do the damn work. Like that's the secret. That's like in my 14 years of coaching, that's the biggest secret I've found is just do the damn work.
Yeah.
And it's the people that do the damn work day in and day out, week in and week out, that see the biggest improvements, not constantly chasing new things or like, all those little things. So, what do you have to add to that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, coming from myself trying to hyper optimize everything, like there's so many things that like the reason why we can speak so well to this is because, first and foremost, I made all these mistakes and I still make these mistakes, right? Like I fall into this trap of like, for example, the whole, like the hyper optimization thing where you're like, okay, now I need to manage all my calories and I need to make sure I'm not eating too much because then I need to, to get better body composition. That would fall under hyper optimization, right? As opposed to being like, I need to eat enough that I feel good and can come back and have better performance, weekly going forward. And you don't need to count calories for that because, like, by eating more, you're going to facilitate the ability to do more exercise at higher intensities. So then you're going to be burning more calories. So it's this really actually positive cycle of being like, oh, I could eat even more food and my performance gets even better. And then, so on and so forth. You don't need to track all your calories and do all this sort of stuff. There are times where you should figure out, oh, am I grossly overeating or grossly undereating? And we're speaking, to the endurance training population, not the general population who could probably use a little bit less food and more movement. But then it also comes back to, this idea of like, I get questions about this all the time. Hey, like, should I be doing 1 minute on, 1 minute off for my VO2 max workouts or 4 minutes on and 4 minutes off for my VO2 max workouts? And I'm like, it doesn't really matter. Like, and we've had this argument a little bit, Dave, of like, well, like I know that the cardiovascular system isn't going to be stimulated as much with the 1x1s, but at the same time, it's like, you're still going to be doing something that is close to VO2 max speed. And let's not get lost in like the minute differences in terms of adaptation. You're going to be all the way on this side of the adaptation curve as opposed to like easy zone 2 work, which is on the other side of it, right? So you're already, going to be gaining most of the benefits and adaptations, to that. And I think that's where people, again, they just get too sucked into, well, my workout needs to be perfect or this needs to be perfect. And it's like, again, it comes down to the specific, like it's consistency, specificity, and progression. And if you're not optimized, so here's where you should be optimizing your sleep. You should be getting enough sleep. You should be eating enough, and then you should be training consistently. And if you do all three of those things, that's where you can start to be like, okay, now I can kind of sprinkle in, something else here and there, to try to make it even a little bit better. But if you aren't doing those and laying the groundwork, then you're not going to gain any benefit from being like, well, I do 40-20s, not 30-30s, because those are better for my VO2 max.
Yeah, I like that. Do you have any other big mistakes that we haven't mentioned?
None. I'm sure we'll come out with another podcast at some point, but none that I can think of off the top of my head. I think, we say this, I think, on every single one of the Fast Physiology podcast episodes, but it's like, focus on the biggest things that are going to make you better. And for me, I always come back to consistency, specificity, and progression. And then from there, after you've really optimized and been able to develop those habits, then you can start to branch off and get better. But we talk about this sort of stuff because we don't want you guys to make the same mistakes we did. Or, I don't. I've been training for 15, 20 years. And, it's like, well, if I knew all this stuff from day one, then, who knows? Perhaps I'd be a better athlete. But hopefully I can confer this knowledge and make you guys better athletes who are listening. Yeah. No, and I agree. I feel like a big reason to hire a coach is that you can benefit from their experience, not just their personal experience in racing, but also their experience in having coached a lot of athletes and like the experience and wisdom of their mistakes so that you don't have to repeat those mistakes. Yeah. Perfect. So where can people find you? Yeah, as always, you guys can find me on Instagram at Critical02. Shoot me a DM. At this point, when this episode goes live, I probably will have an upcoming exercise physiology course. So if you're interested in signing up for the wait list for that or just signing up for it, you can go to criticaloxygen.com and then look under education, and then there should be some courses available. And it's like I said, exercise physiology for athletes and coaches. So I think people who are listening to this would be interested in that. Fantastic. Awesome. Looking forward to the next one. Yeah. Thanks, Dave.